Excellent. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and thank you very much for having me today. So I'm just going to whiz you through very quickly, because if I was to go into all the detail, we'd be here all day. So we conducted the excavation in the summer of 2018. So I'm sure, as most of you know, Carmarthen is one of only two Roman towns in Wales, so the other being Caerwent, Ventus Ilurum. The difference is that obviously Carmarthen is a modern town overlying Moradunum, the Roman town, whereas Caerwent is very little modern construction over the top, so we know a lot more about Caerwent. So this excavation afforded us the opportunity to excavate an area pretty much almost in the centre of the Roman town. And we were hoping to add to the knowledge of kind of Roman urbanism in Wales. So this is kind of what we already knew. So I'm just going to give you a brief outline of what was already known about the town, whiz you through some of our Roman stuff, and then kind of what we've added to the picture of Carmarthen. So this is, we've just amended Heather's image from Heather's report from 2003. So we know that the Roman invasion of Wales began in AD 47 under Governor Astorius Scapula. So campaigns lasted for nearly 30 years, and it wasn't until kind of the late 70s that Wales kind of was subdued. During that period, you've got a number of forts being built across Wales, so a number of frontiers. And we know there's an auxiliary fort at Carmarthen, which is, if I can get the pointer to work. No, just in here. So that was excavated in the 1980s. So it sits on a crossing point over the river, and it was connected to forts at Llandilo and Lucca by the road. So you've got the main military road coming through here. It was reduced in size at some point. So it was built roughly around AD 74 to 77, reduced in size. So you've got the smaller fort in there. And then it was abandoned at some point in the early 2nd century. So the town is built just on the side of the fort, obviously. So Heather James discussed the idea that the town had evolved into a civitas capital from a vicus, which was located on the edge of the fort alongside the Roman road. So vici were minor civilian market centres that developed along the roads. They included workshops and shops as well as residential buildings. Some even had their own field systems. And a number of them continued on after the forts had been abandoned as small settlements. There's been many excavations through Carmarthen in the last 50 years. They've not really provided any evidence for a vicus, although there is evidence of late 1st century and early 2nd century occupation. So in kind of this area and then along through here. The gridded street network, which you can see on the slide, so there are 6 streets that have been found through previous excavations across the town. So they would have divided the town up into blocks or insula. And we, from previous excavations, believe that they were laid down roughly around 130 to 150, and there is some evidence of repair to them throughout the Roman period. As a civitas capital, Moradunum would have contained a number of civic buildings which had been constructed by the wealthier families in the town and its hinterland. So the previous excavations to ours, just off Priory Street here, Richmond Park site, which is now a school, they actually found evidence of a stone temple, which didn't last very long. I think it was gone within a kind of a generation of being built. We have the remains of a bathhouse, and obviously you've got the amphitheatre up here, which was excavated and believed to have been built in the 2nd century. The big civic building that is currently missing is the Forum Basilica, which is the civic centre where the town council, the Ordo, would have sat. You would expect it somewhere in the middle here. If you're familiar with Carmarthen, you know there's a big football stadium there. They did some geophysics, it's not under there. So it's probably under the houses in between the football stadium and the road. So unfortunately, unless somebody wants to knock their building down and rebuild it, we'll probably never find it. So that's a very brief run through. Our site is here, and we found street number 7, which I've got some photos of for you in a bit. So that's just a little bit more detail to show the buildings that have been picked up in other excavations in here as well. This is Professor Jones's excavations in the 60s. And that's ours. So it's very busy. We had over 900 features, most of which were Roman. We do have evidence of some medieval occupation. So we've got all our phases here. So we've got some evidence for very little evidence for medieval occupation, but there is a medieval building. And then we've got the development of what is now modern Priory Street through the post-medieval period. So I'm just going to focus on phases 2 to 6. I'm just going to very quickly whiz you through. So we believe the site was first occupied in the immediate aftermath of the conquest, with evidence that dates to the last quarter of the 1st century, so roughly the time the fort was being built and occupied. So we have buildings from this period all the way across here, which seem to front onto the road. We have remains of ovens from this phase as well in buildings 2 and 3, so I'm going to show you a plan of building 3 shortly. And then we skip to phase 3. We have at least 5 buildings constructed across the site during that time. Building 5 in the centre appears to have had 4 phases of occupation, and I believe it was a shop, and I'll show you a better picture of those shortly. We also have a street being built during phase 3. So the first phase is street 3, so it's this kind of lighter purple thing you can see under here. It doesn't get used for very long because then they build a building over it in phase 4, which is a ceramic shop, which I will, and again I've got pictures and I have one of the bowls that we actually found from the shop here as well, so if anybody wants to come and have a look during break time, I'll stay here and you can please free to come and have a look. Building the ceramic shop, why that looks so funny is because it burnt down. And the fire started within the ceramic shop, and luckily it only affected the ceramic shop. They decided after the ceramic shop burnt down, they'd reinstate the street, and that's in phase 4. And then phase 5, we have many more buildings, but occupation seems to drop off as we get into the 3rd century. We do have buildings continually being built into the 4th century, but the activity does seem to drop off quite substantially. But our last evidence does come from mid to late 4th century, so we're quite confident the site is occupied all the way through. So phase 1, this is building 1 up in the top. So we have it's been remodelled a number of times. You can see where the beam slots kind of overlap each other, and we've got post holes set into some of the beam slots. So you can just about, I hope, make out some of the post holes that have been excavated. You've got some beam slots up here as well. So it's quite a large building in the corner of the site. I think this is one of our only domestic buildings. Doesn't seem to be any evidence for any commerce or industrial activity within this building. It seems to potentially have had a corridor at some point, so these post holes here are just set off this wall here, and they're wide enough for a corridor, so it had been quite a nice building. There are at least 4 rooms within it. And then we've got Samian from the backfill as well. We've got a few sheds of 2nd century pottery, but the building was then levelled after, so we know it doesn't continue into phase 3. So by the early 2nd century, this building has completely gone. We also have building 2. So building 2 was just to the side of building 1, and then you've got building 3 to the side of building 2. Building 3 was quickly constructed over the demolished remains of building 2. Building 2 probably lasted only 10 years maximum before they decided to rebuild it and enlarge it. This one is one of the few ones that had, so these are rubbed out, you've got rubbed out walls through here, so it actually had masonry footings, which is one of the few that did. We have evidence for potential bread ovens, so you'll see in the middle here, there's backfilled oven, and there's a second one. So this one is that one, and then we have a second one in here. And we do have evidence of burnt grain from within and around them. They were surrounded by charcoal deposits, so they're being raked out, and so they've had multiple uses. But again, this phase only lasts for about 25 years, so they're not none of this is in use for a very long time. But they all front onto the road, so they are connected. There is people passing by, and the bread ovens, whether they're just for use for a domestic structure or whether it's being sold, they're not particularly large. So it just could be personal, you've got ovens in your house rather than you're selling, you've got a bakery on the road, I don't know at this point. Then we move into phase 3. So if I just find my We've got phase 3, so early to mid-2nd century. We move very quickly. None of these buildings are in use for a very long time. But this is building 5. Oh, wait to get it to work then. Up here, no. In the top. So it was initially constructed in the early part of phase 3. So we're looking kind of the first quarter of the 2nd century. And it's timber construction. It was reconstructed at least 3 times with the overall building remaining the same. So you'll see all of these wall lines on the same alignment. They seem to have had some problem with this wall. The other wall, we've only got evidence of it being built once. The other wall's rebuilt 3 times. So they seem to have had some structural issues with that one. We think that the bottom end, so you've got road running through here. We think this end here is potentially a shop in this lower room of the building. What you can see on the image, you've got kind of 3 overlapping structures here. So the first one is made of post holes, and then the other 2 you've got beam slots, and you have this division here. It's a bit strange. I couldn't find any other parallels, but it's not very big at all, and it seems to be potential supports for racking or shelves, something like that. So you've got a shop, and you've got this shelf structure in the middle, and then you have a back room here, which at some point, it does have an oven in it. The back was fire damaged because what's labelled as 2230 is a burnt timber. We have evidence that the back room had to be rebuilt as well. The final phase of the building, it was obviously quite posh because it had an opus signinum floor. So the back end might have been the domestic living, and you've got the shop kind of in the front. Was very hard to piece together a lot of these buildings because obviously having been lived on pretty much consistently for 2,000 years, there is so much truncation. We've got huge medieval structures, post-medieval pits across the site. The modern building that was demolished for us to do this was a huge garage with concrete foundations all the way across. So it took me quite a long time to piece this one together. Building 8, which is all that's left of it, unfortunately, with this nice L shape here. So you've got the Priory Street running through here, and then this is the road that takes you up to the school for the previous Priory Street excavations. And that's what it looked like, this wall from here. It's the most substantial wall we had on site, and it seems to suggest that the building was at least 2 stories. There was absolutely no evidence of any industrial activity on the inside. I mean, we only have a very limited space on the inside, but also no evidence of domestic activity in the site. And I am wondering if it's a civic building of some form. It is one of the few that continues across phases, so it wasn't demolished at the end of phase 3. It continues in use throughout phase 4 as well. So you're kind of looking at almost half a century at least worth of use before it does finally get demolished. We were quite limited though if we'd been able to extend a little bit further, but there was electricity cables along here, so not a good idea. We might have had a bit more of an idea, but if anyone's got any other ideas, please feel free to tell me. I'll be very happy to receive feedback. And then skipping through to the nice one. This is building 9. So it was constructed sometime in the mid-2nd century, and it was completely made out of timber. So we have beam slots across here and here. This was a burnt timber, which is all that was left of the other wall. So we definitely have 2 rooms. Unfortunately, we know how it's met its end. You can see the burnt timbers in here. I've got a closer detailed shot in a minute. It was one of the few structures we were actually able to work out exactly what it was, the function it had. So if I flick back to my very first slide, if you can see under there, you've got all the pot. And my colleague Jerry in that photo is very happily excavating all that pot. So this one is this nice cup here, which is a Samian cup. And obviously you can see it's been heavily burnt just from the colour of it. It's the only whole one we had. It is very nice. You don't often see whole pots. We had a few thousand fragments of pot just from this area alone, all concentrated roughly in here. So we had lots of different types of samian, black burnish ware and Severn Valley ware, nothing else. I think there was a bit of amphora chucked in with the demolition stuff over the top. So we know it's a ceramic shop sitting on the street, and we know it specialises in samian, black burnish and Severn Valley ware, which is fantastic. Because samian is so closely datable, Peter Webster, who did our pottery analysis, was able to tell us that the fire occurred in around 170, blimey. And it was a catastrophic fire that completely totaled this building. So there you've got the oak. So they're actually oak planks, and they formed the walls, and they've actually just pulled them in on themselves. So the pottery is underneath those. Unfortunately, we've got a nice post-medieval sewer line running through, and so there would have been a lot more pottery. We actually think the building had a dual use though. So you've got the back room here, and just here there was a bread oven, quite a substantial bread oven. It was a horseshoe gully. It dates to the same phase as the building, and inside the gully, from the fill of the gully, we actually had bread-like material, according to our archaeobotanist, as well as weed and wild plants, which suggests they were using hay for kindling. We had hazelnuts, which he suggests are the snacks of the people baking the bread. They've just chucked it in. So that's really nice. And connected to those were these. So these are, I've interpreted them as drying ovens. Again, I'm happy if anyone else has got any other ideas, but they're not kilns. They're not producing pottery or CBM or anything like that. There was charred grain from inside them as well. So they seem to be drying kilns, drying ovens for potentially for the bread shop if we're going to suggest that we've got bread making happening in the back building, in the back room of the building, connected to the bread oven. So we have two phases. So you can see this one here is the earlier phase. That's the cross-section into the chamber. So you can see the walls here, and you've got the flue coming down here. So that's a better view of it, and that's it in there, and it's got later stake holes all the way across it. And you can see the heat affection. You can also see the really nice concrete stanchion that completely truncated its flue. So all we really have left of this one is this. You can kind of see where it would have been, but that's destroyed all of it. And then you've got this later one, which replaced it, which is, the chamber is gone, unfortunately, thank you again to the stanchion. But we've got the flue here, and it's lined with this mortar, and you've got it in there. So you've got the stone structure, actually built on a raft of CBM as well. So you can see all the roof tile in the makeup there. From the building itself as well, we actually had two kind of localised areas of burnt grain, which the archaeobotanist Wendy, she thinks is actually sacks of grain. So they were being stacked inside the building, and we have them because when it burnt down, they were perfectly preserved. Yeah, they are just nice little round patches, completely dense with grain, I didn't actually run this site, so I haven't really seen these apart from in photos. So, but I know that they were very happy when they found them, and it's been able to work it out is fantastic. We also had evidence of fennel being eaten and beetroot, and I think the fennel is actually the first fennel ever found in Wales as well, which is quite nice. So this is what happens when buildings burn down. You get all this lovely evidence that you don't normally get. Yeah, so they were very nice, and they're smack bang in the middle of the site. But after the building burns down, this is the road, or the street, sorry, and it was constructed right across the top of the burnt building. So exactly where those burnt, I think the burnt timbers are just in here. You can see the sewage pipe there. So you've got the road kind of coming right across the middle of the building. And the street seems to then stay in use for the rest of the Roman period. You've got evidence of it being repatched. So you've got these big stones here, which you can see quite clearly on the drawing, and evidence of bigger stones being used to fill potholes. The other streets that have been excavated across other excavations do also show repair. So we know the street system was in use up until the town, if it was abandoned. But yeah, the street pattern went out of use. And then we have all that's left of the building 11, unfortunately, was this one, this lovely beam slot. And this is phase 5, so we're coming into the 3rd century. We're in the 3rd century here. It's a very substantial beam slot. These post holes are about just over 1 metre across. It is pretty much bang over where building 8 was, so that nice big L-shaped double-storey stone building I showed you earlier. I think it's a replacement. So these beam slots, actually, the post holes had iron spikes set into the bottom. So it seems that they went to great lengths to secure substantial timber posts in this beam slot. Again, no evidence of industrial activity or domestic with it. So whether it's a replacement for building 8, that's my current thinking. But again, happy to take suggestions. And then we move into the 4th century. And this is building 14. It's the last Roman building we have on the site. So I think it was constructed in the early part of the 4th century. I have absolutely no idea what it is. You can see the timber beam slots here before it was excavated. You've got clay floor in between. There are 2 phases to the building, so this is part of the clay floor and it's in here. There are a number of post holes and stake holes in 2 phases. So there's a wooden structure in between the beam slots. It's very narrow as well. But we also had this lovely figurine head, although unfortunately it doesn't look, it's got a bit of bronze disease and it's incredibly corroded. But he or she, because it's either Apollo, Diana, I think, came from one of the beam slots. So I did wonder if it was a votive building, but there is no other evidence to back that up. It's a nice thought. I think my imagination got carried away with me slightly. Roadside shrine and all that kind of thing. You don't find those, or I don't find them very often, so it would be nice. But I can't back that up in any way, so that's not what's gone in the report. It's a timber building of unknown function. It could be Apollo. You've got the lovely hairstyle here. His sister Diana has a very similar hairstyle, but as does Venus. So that's as close as I can get it, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, the X-ray showed absolutely no more detail than what you can see on the picture or the drawing. There is another Diana figurine not far from Carmarthen, if I stretch my memory back to when I wrote the original assessment. So Diana is known in the area. She's a hunting goddess, so potentially she's linked to one of the local hunting deities. They like to conflate deities to, so like Sulis Minerva at Bath. You've got the mix of Minerva and Sulis. We also have these beautiful bits we have quite a few fragments of wall plaster. They all seem to be either grey and white, like this one, or you've got this kind of browny red on the white background. There's no obvious frescoes. It just seems to be borders around the walls or little boxes. You kind of, if you think really hard, you can imagine you're walking around Trajan's Market in Rome and you've got these lovely boxes of black and white they have in Trajan's Market in the shops, and that's how they're decorated. It's quite plain. Unfortunately, they're kind of not in situ from any particular building, which doesn't really help. They've just been kind of found in levelling deposits, so they very quickly demolished most of these buildings, levelled them, and then rebuilt over the top. So it was not a static site over the 400 years, or 300 and a bit years. It consistently changes, which is it's very lovely. But it does make it very hard when you've got the truncations then to try and piece together. But we also have, what have I done? No. We had quite a large number of other objects. The metal objects do not survive very well. So we have a silver denarius here. I think it's Claudius. And then we've got Trajan with his very unique hairstyle. You can never confuse Trajan. We have a closed turret ring here, so that's 1st or 2nd century, and then I think this was a gaming piece. So it took quite a long time to put all this evidence together. So the earliest evidence we have, like I said, is kind of mid to late 1st century to early 2nd century, and then you have continual occupation to the last quarter of the 4th century. So the latest dating evidence we have is a coin of Magnentius, so he's 350 to 353. But there is a coin of the Emperor Honorius, which has been found in other excavations, and which pushes the date back even further, because it was actually found in the repair of a road surface in Carmarthen in one of the other excavations. So it's been dropped by somebody who is repairing the road, and obviously Honorius is very late, so it does push at least some occupation, whether it's still acting as a formal town or a civitas capital for the tribal area. At that time, we don't know, but it does suggest at least people are living in the area of Moradunum up until the 4th century and probably beyond. So we had 14 Roman buildings, but we had evidence of at least 8 others. But because of the truncations, I wasn't able to piece them into coherent buildings. It's just the odd wall group of post holes across the site. But I couldn't put them into proper buildings. So we have very little evidence of domestic function. So the building one I showed you is quite possible. And then we've got evidence potentially for people living in the backs of their shops. But the area seems to be pretty much related to commerce and industry throughout the whole period. So obviously building 9, so you've got the ceramic shop and the bread oven out the back. We don't have any evidence of post-Roman occupation from our excavations, but like I said, with the coin of Honorius and other excavations did find potentially early medieval ditches. I think it was one of Heather's excavations, potentially early medieval ditches. So there might have been a very short gap before people moved back in, or there might have been no gap at all. It's very difficult to tell based on the evidence we have so far. But we were able to address a number of research questions. So the foundation of the town was one of the big ones I was looking at. So like I said at the beginning, there were no urban sites in Wales prior to the Roman invasion, and then we only have the 2 known ones. So Iron Age settlement seems to be based on hill forts and defended enclosures, which you've seen very nicely with one of Fran's slides. Very few of these sites have been excavated, though, so it's quite difficult to work out what the structure of society was in the Iron Age. It has been suggested that Carmarthen was placed there because you've got the Merlin's Hill fort not that far away, but Merlin's Hill's very little excavations happened, so you don't actually know it was kind of occupied at the time when Carmarthen was constructed. But the previous excavations suggested the town was Hadrianic. I think we can push it back to at least Trajanic. So all the early ceramics that we've got, kind of mid to late 1st century, I personally think you've got some form of settlement starting pretty much as soon as the fort is constructed. Whether it's a vicus or not, I don't think we'll ever be able to say. But you've got the remains of a temple very early. Again, it's a Trajanic foundation, the temple, and it's gone very quickly. So it's gone by the time the street pattern is laid down, so AD 130. So it's gone before Hadrian's gone. So that the temple lasts for very, very few years. You have evidence. Sorry, I've lost myself now. So this is supported by earlier excavations, as I've said. So evidence from Church Street in 1978 found possible evidence of stock enclosures from the late 1st to the early 2nd century. So that's right up. If I move to this slide, that's right up by the auxiliary fort in here. Okay. So we do have evidence from other parts of the town that it was settled. It's not just our excavations in Priory Street. The town began to develop in the late 1st century. So we have evidence from places like Exeter that the actual emperor or his agents actually helped to found towns as well. Because where do these people get their money from to build these towns straight away? A temple would have cost money. So there is potential to suggest that the soldiers helped to construct Carmarthen on orders. And we have the coin loss profile does suggest that you've got very early coins in Carmarthen, so coins started to be used pretty much as soon as the military arrived. And we know that monetisation of Wales is linked to the Roman military. So coins were being used very quickly in Carmarthen. So Claudius although it's a silver coin, so it would have stayed in use for a few a few generations. I think if you drop that, you're going to look for it. It developed then into the mid-second century, with occupation of the town continuing to expand. And it was, like I said, it's not a static site. It is continually rebuilt. We do have evidence of potential metalworking across parts of the site as well, although I don't know what they were producing in that area. So across here, it's all very bitty because of later truncations, and wasn't really able to work it out. But we have a lot of demolition and dump layers, like I said, so they are levelling these buildings and rebuilding straight away. So there's pretty much no downtime in this area. And it's a very small area, but it does all, like I said, seem to be linked to trade and commerce. And it continues to grow into the 3rd century, where we have a very gradual decline. But buildings, like I said, are continuing to be built. And we have evidence of potential Roman worship with the figurine all the way up until the 4th century. And then for some reason, they just leave this part of the site. It disappears. Where they go, there is evidence of later stuff down here, and I think Honorius was in one of these ones, if I remember correctly. So there are people, like I said, still living here. This kind of ties in with all the other excavations. So we have quite intense 2nd and 3rd century occupation, and then things just seem to die down. You've got a nice big house up here, which is late, and you've potentially got another one down here, which is also quite late. So there are still wealthy people living in their nice big kind of villa-style houses, but we kind of lose the central area at this point. We know they're bringing pottery in, so they're well connected to the Roman world. You've got lots of Samian, we've got amphora. So there is trade coming in from the outside. We do have local potteries. We have Severn Valley ware as well coming up, would have come along the river. Black Burnish ware up from Poole. So they are well connected into the trade networks. So I kind of have a picture of a nice busy town with a nice market centre. And there's still an awful lot to learn, I think. It's about the hinterland as well, not just about the town, how it functioned and how it relied on its outside population, its farms, people bringing in where did the wheat come from? Where was the fennel grown, I would like to know? And the beetroot, where did that come from? But yeah, so we have evidence of people adopting a more Roman lifestyle as well, with the kind of more exotic imports and food. Sorry, I'm probably out of time now, aren't I? Yeah. I have a lot more to say, sorry, about the last bit of the town, but feel free to come and ask me questions.